Hello there. Most of the videos on this channel so far focus on games I've put a lot of hours into over a fairly drawn out period of time, and this is another one of those. Project Zomboid. I've played it since one of the first public releases that you had to download from the forums. I can't really remember where I first heard of the game. It was almost certainly somebody in that beautiful early 2010s YouTube gaming era, but I just can't remember who. I played it quite a lot when it was sprite based, that sort of 2.5D style, much more basic than the game we know and love now. Since the Steam release I've played about 200 hours, so I think it's fair to say I know what I'm talking about, but feel free to correct me if I say something overwhelmingly dumb. In my last video I talked about 7 Days to Die, a survival crafting game set in the Middle America-esque zombie apocalypse. Project Zomboid is also a survival crafting game set in a Middle America-esque zombie apocalypse. However, they're extremely different games in a vast number of ways, whilst somehow remaining very comparable thanks to their shared concept, which is, to quickly recap, surviving in a Middle America-esque zombie apocalypse. If you were to press the cold barrel of a pistol to the back of my head, I'd smile, welcoming the quick embrace of icy darkness compared to being a witness to the slow ending of the majority of life on Earth that's almost certainly occurring within our lifetime. But then you'd probably break me from my reverie by asking something like, which of the two games do you prefer? And I'd completely struggle to answer. They undeniably fill different gaming niches, but I usually find that playing one leads to playing the other once I'm bored, which is, funnily enough, why I'm making this video after the 7 Days to Die video. When I originally played Project Zomboid way back in 2013 or so, I treated it as a sort of roguelike. Now, granted that may have been in some part due to the extremely short average lifespan of my character, but I thought that was cool enough. I'd start a game, smother my wife with a pillow, and then prepare myself to leave the starting house. I'd then make my way to the nearest warehouses in search of a fire axe, or at the very least a hammer or two. My goal was always just to try and kill as many zombies as I could, treating kill count as a score, basically. Since then, both me and the game have evolved significantly. For example, I now have 8 penises and a prehensile tail, while the game has much more advanced late-game survival goals, meaning I can establish a meaningful homestead rather than just run around trying to make the kill count higher before succumbing to zombification. In 2013, I think I was 17. It's hard for me to be sure because I don't really keep a close eye on the passage of time. I'm currently somewhere between 21 and 45, but I'm not exactly sure. My point being that when I was younger, I was extremely sensitive to horror, whether it were movies, books, or indeed, and in fact, especially video games. For example, I've always regarded the Metro and Stalker series as some of my favourite games, despite barely being able to play a few hours into them until more recently because I was just straight up too scared to keep playing them. Zomboid handles horror incredibly well when you're first playing. Of course you get numb to it eventually, just like anything, but thanks to a few factors it really will get your fear responses going if you're at all susceptible to that sort of thing. Part of the reason for this is that you're quite easy to kill. Just like in 7 Days to Die, you can tweak most of the game's settings, but by default a bite from a zombie that penetrates whatever you're wearing and leaves a wound is guaranteed to give you the incurable Nox infection that will kill and then subsequently unkill you after a few days of miserable sickness. Scratches and lacerations, though, aren't guaranteed to cause zombification, which is a great way to make you feel fear for your character, so you keep on playing, sure that you're going to start getting sick soon, worried every time your character feels a bit hot that that's the beginning of the end, leading to an immense release of tension when you do make it a few days into the clear after getting a scratch. In games like this, a good balance of that tension and release cycle is what it's all about for me. If a game keeps me on edge the entire time I'm playing it, I just won't bother with it and I'll find something else to do that's more pleasant. The moments where you're fleeing from a bunch of zombies that just won't lose sight of you need to be offset by the quiet time spent inside whatever shelter you have, reading a book, putting a meal together, sewing patches into your trousers or tending to crops. Zomboid is an absolutely masterful demonstration of this concept. I don't know another game that's simultaneously this cozy and terrifying at the same time. I'll spend hours arranging furniture in an apartment block that I've taken over, and then pick up my Spas 12 from the table to go clear out an overrun mall. The mention of the Spas 12 might have caused a few ears to prick up, since that's not a weapon in the unmodded game. I've played enough by now that I like to run a fairly massive catalogue of mods to keep things fresh and to patch over a few annoying little features that I get tired of in the base game. I'm not going to run through my whole mod list, partially because it changes every time I play, but a few of the essentials for me are the Autostar vehicle mods, DJ's various scrap crafting mods, and either Britta's weapon pack or the vanilla firearms expansion. I usually run a load of other things more specific to how I'm playing. Most recently I had a large rooftop farm, so I ran a set of mods that made canning foods more worthwhile and easier to do self-sufficiently. Ideally, a game will never make you feel like you need to mod it in order to stay interested, but it's always nice to have the option. I hope the footage that's been playing throughout the video so far demonstrates the variety of moods that Zomboid can inhabit. I know my videos are sort of all over the place and not super coherent all the time. I just write down my thoughts and occasionally move them around to make more sense, but it should by this point be obvious that I absolutely love Zomboid. However, it's not flawless. There are a few misleading things in the game that are presumably intended to work as described eventually, but currently don't. I'll talk about a couple of these, but I recommend binge watching a load of Retinaru's Zomboid videos where he tests and demonstrates a few of these. One that's always annoyed me is that zombies are totally unaffected by fog, reducing what could be a really cool risk versus reward situation to being a simple debuff for the player. Instead of taking advantage of the fog to sneak into a populated area, you're better off just staying home, reading a book and waiting it out. Some of the character traits don't quite do exactly what the description says. One example is short-sighted, the description for which says small view distance and slower visibility fade. Retinaru did a video demonstrating that it doesn't actually do that. Apparently it does reduce your foraging radius, so if they've gone to the effort to program in that foraging effect, why not update the description? Choosing your character's traits is a major decision that you only get to do once. There shouldn't be any guesswork. If a trait isn't finished, then why not just say so in the description? I can't believe that the devs just wouldn't know that there's a mismatch there, especially since most of these issues are well known by the community. Speaking of the community, Zomboid has spawned some absolutely great YouTube and Twitch content. It's just as watchable as it is playable to me, which is an often overlooked point when talking about games. It's quite important to me and probably a lot of other people too. Sometimes I work from home and I usually find some Zomboid Twitch VODs to download and have as background content while I work. Part of this comes from how well suited Zomboid is to a role-playing approach, which isn't how I usually play games. I tend to be much more mechanically focused, intent on getting the best out of a game's systems and making the numbers go up, whereas someone like Robaz or Ambiguous Amphibian will inhabit their characters much more directly, rather than just using them as a tool to achieve a goal like I usually would. Only very occasionally can I get into that mindset, usually if I have an extended period of time with nothing going on or I'm left at home on my own. If I were off work for 2 weeks and my girlfriend happened to be travelling at the same time, that's the only time I can really melt into a character like that. Otherwise I'm too focused on getting things done before I have to jack myself out of the Matrix and go back to the real world to plan fiber networks or something. From a mechanical perspective, the game is quite complex. There are lots of systems to deal with and the interface isn't always particularly friendly. The inventory system is a bit clunky and the radial menu for vehicle controls can be a pain sometimes. To a certain extent, I'd like to imagine some of this is deliberate, to represent how easy it is to fumble things during a stressful situation. If you're running back to your vehicle from a herd of Zeds, dumping your kit in the boot isn't going to be as smooth a transaction as usual. But I think that's quite a generous way of thinking, and I suspect it's actually just this way because that's how it always was, and it'd be risky to make major UI changes at this point. My usual approach to Zomboid is to start as quietly as possible, finding a nice place on the outskirts somewhere and live off a combination of nature and scavenging. Discounting the zombies for a moment, the wilderness survival aspect of the game is actually really great. Spearfishing by a little cabin you've built on the riverside, finding and transporting a stove and some furniture for it. I'd probably enjoy playing like that with zombies turned off for quite a while. It'd be sort of like Stardew Valley where all the villagers have been taken by the rapture and you've been left alone in purgatory. I mentioned earlier that you can change the game's sandbox parameters, so you could probably actually do that, turn the zombies off I mean. Personally I always play with zombies and loot respawn off, but the initial population of zombies increased. And you might think that would get boring, but there's huge numbers of zombies to start with and they're programmed to migrate and gather into herds to roam around the map. Maybe after multiple game years it would get dull, but I've never reached that point yet where the world feels empty. Thinned out for sure, but that's why I play with respawn turned off in the first place, so that I can feel like I've accomplished something when my local area starts to feel a bit safer. That's probably enough rambling for now. I'm glad that so many people have been finding my content so far and enjoying it enough to like, subscribe, bell, comment, share, blah blah blah, all that shit. I know that YouTube can be an extremely fickle platform, picking content to recommend seemingly completely at random sometimes, so I'm grateful for it so far. Remember to remain indoors. The weather is getting nice, but don't be tempted. The outdoors remains uninhabitable. Under no circumstances should you breathe outside air or touch grass unless cultivated indoors from pre-event seed sock. Until next time, goodbye.